This video is intended to provide general information regarding issues relating to the sales and use tax laws and cannabis tax law administered by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, which may affect cannabis businesses and will not serve as a basis for relief of liability under Revenue and Taxation Code sections 6596 and 55045. It is also not intended to provide advice or guidance related to other state and local statutes and regulations relating to the cannabis industry. Additionally, for the federal government's guidance regarding marijuana enforcement, refer to the U.S. Department of Justice website at www.justice.gov.
Hi, and welcome to Tax Help for the Cannabis Industry. My name is Jennifer, and I'm a business taxes specialist with the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, or CDTFA. The CDTFA is responsible for administering many of the tax and fee programs in the state of California, including the new Cannabis Tax Program. In this presentation, I'll be focusing on information for cannabis distributors. I would like to provide you with some basic information on the new cannabis taxes and make sure you are aware of your tax requirements. Please keep in mind that we are providing general information on the new cannabis taxes. You may have other tax requirements that are not covered in this video. To begin, let's go over the new Cannabis Tax Law. As you may know, voters approved Proposition 64 on November 8, 2016. Proposition 64, which was later amended by Senate Bill 94, legalized adult use of cannabis and established the Cannabis Tax Law. The Cannabis Tax Law provides for two new taxes on the sale of cannabis starting January 1, 2018, a cultivation tax and an excise tax. Cannabis distributors are responsible for collecting both of these taxes and paying them to the CDTFA. A cannabis distributor is a person who procures, sells, and/or transports cannabis between licensed cannabis businesses, such as a cultivator, manufacturer, or retailer. Cannabis distributors play a very important role in the cannabis industry. If you are a cannabis distributor, you have several requirements. First, you are required to register with the CDTFA for a cannabis tax permit. This permit is separate from any other permit or account you may have with the CDTFA. You are also responsible for collecting the cultivation tax and the cannabis excise tax. And you must electronically file cannabis tax returns to report and pay any cannabis tax amounts due to the CDTFA. As a distributor, you must also keep accurate records of your commercial cannabis business activities and ensure you obtain the appropriate business licenses. The Bureau of Cannabis Control within the California Department of Consumer Affairs is responsible for issuing commercial cannabis distributor licenses. However, there may be other local government licensing requirements, so you should make sure to contact your city and county government offices for information on local licenses. Additionally, if you are making sales and not just transporting product, you are responsible for registering with the CDTFA for a seller's permit and filing sales and use tax returns. You would need to file sales and use tax returns, even if all of your sales are sales for resale. I'll discuss more about your sales and use tax requirements in a moment. It is also important to note that there is another type of business that may operate as a distributor, and that's a cannabis microbusiness. A cannabis microbusiness is required to hold only one license but is authorized to operate as more than one type of business. For example, a microbusiness may operate as a cultivator, distributor, manufacturer, and retailer. If you are a microbusiness that operates as a distributor, you are responsible for all the same requirements as a distributor, including registering for a cannabis tax permit and collecting the cannabis taxes. Let's talk about the cannabis taxes in a little more detail, as you are responsible for collecting them. The Cannabis Cultivation Tax is imposed upon cultivators of cannabis and applies to all harvested cannabis that enters the commercial market. Cannabis is considered to have entered the commercial market once it has completed testing and complies with a quality assurance review. Cultivators are responsible for paying the cultivation tax to you, the distributor, or, in some cases, to a manufacturer if the cannabis is transferred or sold to a manufacturer first. The cultivation tax is calculated based on weight and category. There are currently 3 categories: cannabis flowers, cannabis leaves, and fresh cannabis plant. To qualify for the fresh category, the cannabis plant must be weighed in an unprocessed state within 2 hours of harvesting. The current rates can be found on the Special Taxes and Fees rate page under Cannabis Taxes on our website. These rates will be adjusted annually for inflation. As I previously mentioned, the tax is due when the cannabis enters the commercial market. Cannabis is considered to have entered the commercial market when it has completed and complies with the quality assurance review and testing required by law. You will need to provide an invoice or receipt to the cultivators and manufacturers you collect tax from and must identify the licensees, the associated unique identifier, the amount of tax collected, the weight and category of the cannabis, and the date of transfer. The invoice or receipt serves as verification for the cultivators and manufacturers that the cultivation tax was paid to a distributor and relieves them of the liability for the cultivation tax. As a cannabis distributor, you are liable for paying the tax to the CDTFA. As a distributor, you are also responsible for collecting the cannabis excise tax from retailers you supply. The cannabis excise tax is imposed upon purchasers and applies to the retail sale of all cannabis and cannabis products, such as edibles, lotions, oils, and waxes. Retailers are responsible for collecting the cannabis excise tax from their customers at the time of purchase at a rate of 15% of the average market price of the retail sale. Beginning January 1st, 2018, retailers must collect the excise tax from their customers on all sales of cannabis and cannabis products. As I mentioned, the cannabis excise tax is based on the average market price of the retail sale. The average market price is based on the type of transaction that occurred between the seller, whether that be a cultivator, manufacturer, or distributor, and the retailer when the retailer purchased the cannabis or cannabis products. The transaction can either be an arm's length transaction or a non-arm's length transaction. There are a couple requirements for a transaction to be considered an arm's length transaction. First, the consideration or payment received by the seller must reflect the fair market value of the cannabis or cannabis products in the open market. And second, the transaction must be between 2 informed and willing parties. In an arm's length transaction, the average market price is the wholesale cost of the cannabis or cannabis products plus a markup. We'll talk more about this in a minute. In a non-arm's length transaction, the average market price is the cannabis retailer's gross receipts from the retail sale. An example of a non-arm's length transaction would be a business that is both a licensed distributor and retailer of their cannabis products. So let's talk about the average market price of an arm's length transaction a little bit more. To determine the average market price in an arm's length transaction, you need to know 2 things: the wholesale cost of the cannabis or cannabis products and the markup rate. The wholesale cost is the amount paid by the retailer for the cannabis or cannabis products, including transportation charges. The CDTFA is required to determine the markup rate every 6 months. This rate is only used to compute the average market price of cannabis and cannabis products sold or transferred in an arm's length transaction. Retailers may use any markup they would like to establish their retail selling price. You must use the markup rate in effect at the time of the sale. The current markup rate is posted on our Special Taxes and Fees rate page on our website under Cannabis Taxes. As a cannabis distributor, you will calculate the amount of excise tax due on the cannabis and cannabis products you supply to retailers and collect that amount from the retailers. As with the cultivation tax, you are required to provide an invoice or receipt to retailers listing the amount of cannabis excise tax collected. This receipt serves as verification for the retailer that the cannabis excise tax was paid to a distributor and relieves them of their liability for the cannabis excise tax. As a cannabis distributor, you are liable for paying the tax to the CDTFA. Let's go over an example of how you can calculate the amount of cannabis excise tax due. In an arm's length transaction, once the wholesale cost and markup rate are known, you may calculate the amount of excise tax due from the retailer. For example, let's say that a retailer purchases 5 pounds of cannabis flowers for $7,500 in an arm's length transaction. You apply the current markup rate, in this case 60%, to the wholesale cost paid by the retailer to compute an average market price of $12,000 on this transaction. The 15% excise tax is applied to the average market price of $12,000 to compute the excise tax due of $1,800. As a cannabis distributor, you are responsible for collecting the $1,800 of cannabis excise tax from the retailer and reporting and paying it to the CDTFA on your cannabis tax return. As I previously mentioned, you must use the markup rate in effect at the time of the sale. Again, the current markup rate is posted on our Special Taxes and Fees rate page on our website under Cannabis Taxes. On October 12, 2019, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 34, allowing licensees authorized to make retail sales to provide free medicinal cannabis to qualified medicinal cannabis patients. The cannabis excise tax does not apply to any medicinal cannabis that is provided free of charge to qualified medicinal cannabis patients. Additionally, the cultivation tax will not apply to medicinal cannabis that a cultivator designates for donation in the California Cannabis Track and Trace System, CCTT. And licensees are no longer responsible for use tax for donations of cannabis to a retailer for subsequent donation to a medicinal cannabis patient. This bill becomes operative when the necessary changes are made to the CCTT system or March 1, 2020, whichever comes first. We will provide additional information on this topic as we receive it, so be sure to check out our website. So, now that you know about the cannabis taxes, I'd like to mention a few key items you need to be aware of regarding filing your cannabis tax return. Filing your cannabis tax return is different than filing your state and federal income tax returns or your sales and use tax return. You must file your return online on the CDTFA website. Make sure you know your return due date and the total transactions that occurred during your reporting period. Make sure you report the cultivation tax due for any cannabis that entered the commercial market during your reporting period. And make sure you report the excise tax due for any cannabis or cannabis products sold or transferred to a cannabis retailer during the reporting period. This is true whether or not the retailer has already sold the product or whether or not you have collected payment from the retailer. And always keep copies of the returns you have filed. If you need help, give us a call. Now that you know about your cannabis tax responsibilities, let's discuss some sales and use tax topics. If you are making sales and not just transporting product, you are responsible for registering with the CDTFA for a seller's permit and filing sales and use tax returns. Filing your sales and use tax return is different than filing your cannabis tax return. You can file your return on the CDTFA website. Make sure you know your return due date and if you need to make prepayments. Also, make sure you know if you are making a taxable sale. In general, sales tax applies to retail sales of tangible personal property in California. In addition, some service and labor costs are taxable if they are part of the sale of tangible personal property. Sales tax does not apply to valid sales for resale. Unless you have a Cannabis Microbusiness license, as a cannabis distributor, all of your sales should be sales for resale. However, if you do make taxable sales, you are responsible for paying sales tax on these transactions. See our video on cannabis retailers for more information. We've provided you with information you need to know about the new cannabis taxes, but there is some additional information that all businesses need to know. All businesses should know about resale certificates. A resale certificate allows you to buy resale inventory without paying sales tax reimbursement to the seller. You must provide a timely completed resale certificate to your supplier with your seller's permit information at the time you are making your purchases or prior to making your purchases. We have a form on our website, Form CDTFA-230, which you can use as a general resale certificate. There are penalties for misusing resale certificates, so you should not use a resale certificate for purchasing items for personal use. Additionally, when you sell products to retailers, those retailers will issue a resale certificate for you to keep for your records. The resale certificate will contain the retailer's seller's permit information and a statement that the items are purchased for resale. All businesses should also know about use tax. Use tax is a tax on items that you use or consume and purchased without paying tax. Use tax is the same rate as sales tax and generally applies to items you purchased from outside the state of California without the payment of California sales or use tax, or items you removed from your resale inventory for personal use. It is important to understand the tax requirements for the cannabis industry. We have much more information available for you in our tax guide for cannabis businesses on the CDTFA website. Please be sure you take a look. Additionally, the Bureau of Cannabis Control within the California Department of Consumer Affairs is responsible for licensing cannabis distributors. Make sure to take a look at their website for information on your licensing requirements. If you have general questions for the CDTFA, you can always email us. Our Customer Service Center is also available to help with general questions and provide tax assistance Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. except state holidays. We also have videos available that address other aspects of the cannabis industry. I hope you found this information for cannabis distributors helpful.